Hey everyone, welcome back to the GameSpot stage here at E3 2017. Joining Callie and myself is Pete Hines, who you might recognize from Bethesda's E3 press conference. Pete, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely, thanks for having me.
And we're here to talk about The Evil Within 2, another little surprise that you guys just sort of dropped into your press conference. Very exciting. Where do we start? Where is the game going to drop us off?
So it picks up a little bit after the events of the first Evil Within, where Sebastian's life has basically gone to hell. Nobody really believes his account of what happened at the asylum. He's essentially lost his family. His daughter died. He and his wife are splits. He's an alcoholic. He has basically hit the very bottom of the barrel, and that's where we find him at the outset of Evil Within 2. If you played the first Evil Within, remember his partner Kidman. Kidman comes back and finds him and says, you thought your daughter was dead. She's not. Mobius has her. They're using her, and you need to go in and get her and bring her out. And that's where the Evil Within 2 starts. It's a redemption story about a father trying to get the daughter he thought was dead back and hopefully piece his life back together.
So what I loved about the first game is that not only, obviously it was Shinji Mikami, it was the master of horror games, kind of going back to what he does best, but it had this story that had so many layers of creepiness and just psychological torment, I guess. Is that going to be ever present again?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's definitely a game that keeps the player off balance. I think it's true for a lot of games, but certainly for survival horror that you sort of have to balance the intensity of whether it's jump scares or frightening combat or whatever, that if you just do that nonstop, that the player essentially becomes desensitized to it because it's just all the time. It's kind of fatiguing. So you have to sort of balance that intensity with exploration and a little bit of downtime to allow the player to catch their breath. And I think that's one of the things that Shinji and his team are doing a little bit more of this time around is more sections that have exploration options, side quests, things that you can do to maybe get some more resources to help better prepare you for the next area, as opposed to just more of a A to B, B to C linear path, which you can still do. Like if you just kind of want to go through and play the main quest, you still can, but there's lots more side quests and areas to explore, and as a result, sort of varying the intensity and how that impacts the player visually. From an audio standpoint, as you well know, survival horror games really rely heavily on sound design and using sound design and sound effects to create tension and drama even when nothing is actually happening. So finding the right mix of all of those things is one of the things we've tried to improve on even more in Evil Within 2.
So I was going to ask, is Shinji Mikami directing this one?
Yeah, I mean, it's his studio and his hands are still all over it. So when you talk about that pacing or those certain moments or amplifying a particular area or maybe ratcheting things down a little bit because he wants the player to have a little bit of beat or to do something else, that that's what Shinji is best at. So yeah, he's still the head of this project overall, but he's been working with other people on the team to maybe step up and take larger roles in different parts of the game as he continues to try and grow his team.
Yeah, because I was going to ask, I remember reading an interview with him where he said that he felt that game directors over the age of 40 were given like all the best games. They were given the most opportunities, and he felt that younger developers and designers weren't necessarily given those opportunities.
I think he still believes that, and I think he's tried to sort of to take that into account as the Evil Within 2 has progressed in terms of giving people the opportunity to be more of a lead where he's not directly telling folks, no, we're going to do it like this, no, this enemy's going to look like this, no, this level's going to look like this. But at the same time, all of that stuff still rolls up to somebody, and so Shinji still, has been involved, has, kind of given his feedback and kind of tweaked and tuned things and talking to the team as we've gone through and will continue to all the way through launch.
Aside from the side quest structure you mentioned, is there anything else that's like a big departure from the first game that fans can expect to see?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a departure, but definitely an area that we wanted to focus on more was that idea of character and story, which isn't to say that Evil Within didn't have one, but I think they really wanted to emphasize that as a point of strength this time around, both with Sebastian as a character. If you played the Evil Within, it's probably not out of bounds to say he's kind of an a-hole. Like he's not really a very likable character, not really somebody that the player necessarily sort of, he's no Nathan Drake. He's not this sort of easily associate character that you play as. There's a little bit of a disconnect there, and so I think this time around with Sebastian and this quest to find his daughter and sort of humanizing him a lot. Last time he was a detective and he was detecting. He was trying to figure out what was going on. This time it's very different. It's about finding his daughter. It's a very personal story, and seeing him sort of at his very lowest point and following his journey and guiding him through his journey for redemption, I think is a better overall sort of narrative and connection with the player. And then what the team has done with even some of the enemies, in the trailer and what we showed at the showcase, we showed a little bit of Stefano, who is this sort of like psychotic murderer / artist. He's interested in the beauty and art of death. He's the guy that you see with the knife kill the soldier who stays in this sort of arced position with the rose petals coming out of him. So he's very sort of obsessed with the beauty of death, and he has this sort of sidekick creature thing called Obscuro, who's like a living camera that takes pictures of all of this. And so sort of developing those into more interesting personalities and characters in and of themselves, as well as some of the characters you'll meet as you're exploring around the world, I think gives you a much better sense of place where we didn't have as much of that in the Evil Within. The player choice, and I think the last one would be just sort of the world warping aspect, that as you're playing through, it's not just, well, I walked into this room and then I turned around and there used to be a door there, now there's a wall, but it's more about big spaces that are kind of being warped and changed in this sort of virtual world that STEM is, the player will experience and kind of explore and will affect their journey through the game.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, so the first game, obviously, he goes to the asylum and he's warped around a bunch of really kind of psychologically quite scary events and sees a lot of incredible monsters. In the second game, what is the setting? So we're not in the asylum anymore, we're kind of
Correct.
outside?
So the basic setup for the Evil Within is there's a corporation called Mobius. And Mobius has this idea that they can take and connect the consciousness of, this is my stupid interpretation of it. Shinji's is probably way more complex and on point, but it's sort of connecting the consciousness of people to create like a new world, a new reality. And what's happened in the Evil Within 2 is Mobius took your daughter, who you thought was dead, and used her as this sort of clean slate, as the center for STEM to create a new world. And that's where you get sent to find her. So it's a virtual world that you sort of go into to find her that's been created. It's sort of powered by your daughter. And that's where you go. But as you're playing through it, it's sort of changing and evolving, and stuff is happening to it. So it's not like I went to this asylum and there was this serial killer and then sort of things went down a rabbit hole. You're sort of jumping immediately into this other world, which is where she is somewhere to be found and kind of powering all of this.
So she's like the kind of host, I guess.
Basically,
the
kind of.
seed.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
But
seed's probably a better word.
Yeah. So, but I imagine like as a child, she would have a very sort of pure look at the world.
Yeah.
But there must be these forces that are manipulating her.
And what's going on there and how all of that sort of gets so corrupted and distorted and awful is part of what you find out as you play the game. The Fly is very interested in Evil Within too.
Yeah.
It's buzzing by, trying to pick up tips and hints and maybe a few secrets. But that's part of the story that unravels. Like just on its face value, why does that mean that you're in this horrible, distorted world? What's happened and how it's gotten to that point is part of the story as Sebastian's going through to try and find his daughter.
And would that mean that the monsters and enemies you encounter are fabrications of somebody's mind?
Basically, like the things that you see are almost, or at least some of the things that you see are almost manifestations of corrupted ideas or awful things or whatever, terrible memories that have manifested themselves into creatures or monsters or whatever it is. You'll see here, like even in this trailer where this sort of ooze is grabbing him, that's a reoccurring theme in the world, this stuff that kind of infects and corrupts everything around it. It affects some of the monsters and creatures and how they manifest themselves. It has some gameplay implications. So it's a constantly sort of changing, evolving, keep the player off balance as they're playing through the game in terms of where am I and what am I doing and what's going on and where do I go next and what do I do.
This has been an incredible year for Japanese games. I mean, like looking at Nier, Neo, Resident Evil 7, and now looking ahead to The Evil Within 2. How do you think that, like, I mean, what does it bring to Bethesda's sort of slate of games is to have this kind of tentpole horror franchise?
Sure. Well, I mean, I've been at Bethesda almost 18 years. I feel fairly confident saying we're not really known for survival horror. So it's not like we have this long legacy of all of these survival horror franchises, and this is another one. But I think what we do share with Tango is this idea of sort of a really good sense of place. We like working with studios that have a real passion and expertise, which clearly Shinji and his team do, and sort of working with them to allow them to come up with and create something, even if it's not necessarily what we're known for from a genre standpoint. It does fit kind of our ideals of trying to do something different. Survival horror was kind of heading in this one direction where it was a lot more of kind of almost an arsenal and mowing things down and lots of ammo. And the Evil Within kind of zigged when everybody else zagged and said, no, we're going to go with scarcity of resources and trying really hard to stay alive, and running away maybe being your best option a lot of the time, or giving the player some choice in terms of how they're going to handle a situation. And I think we share those kind of design sensibilities with them, but it's bringing a very unique perspective to our lineup, one that you wouldn't necessarily think of an id or Arcane as being folks that would do survival horror, but Shinji Mikami and Tango, like, well, that makes total sense because that's what they know, and that's kind of where he started in this industry. So it was a good fit for us, and we're pretty excited about what's coming with the Evil Within 2.
Well, you stole my question. So
Sorry.
No, I was going to specifically ask about the survival horror space because we got Resident Evil and we got Outlast 2, but you pretty much answered
Well,
that.
and one of the things that we've talked about, I get asked is like, well, I guess if I'm not into survival horror, like this isn't really for me. And look, if you don't like being scared, well, then you definitely shouldn't play this because it's a scary game. But it's not like blood porn, right? It's not just like awful. It's not a Saw movie where there's just blood and dismemberment all the time. And I think because it's got some really compelling action and a character and story that are going to be really engaging, that even if you're not predisposed to survival horror, this might be a thing you end up looking at. I mean, visually, I think it looks really good. It does have elements of sort of action adventure games that I think folks will take to, and there was a certain amount of that we saw from the Evil Within where folks tried it and maybe we didn't quite pay off as much on things like story, but I think this time around, because it's more of an emphasis that you don't have to love survival horror or else you won't like this game. Though you do have to be willing to be scared, because that is definitely going to happen.
Interesting said. So you're not going for blood porn, but what I find is that the creature design in particular is kind of the thing that not disgust, but like that's the thing that gets to me.
No, disgust is a pretty good word, actually. Yeah, like the very first one that you see, I'm thinking, the very first one that you see is just absolutely disgusting and horrifying, just on its own, just like nightmarish. I'm gonna wake up sweating at 3 a.m. thinking of that thing chasing me. It doesn't even have to do anything to you. It's just the sort of the appearance of it that is disturbing enough on its own. And then, of course, like, well, most of the time they are trying to kill you, and you do have to deal with them, and then it becomes just that much more intense and scary. But yeah, they are off-putting and unsettling, as is the world. And again, as we talked about, the sound design really plays into that. If you have something that's really unsightly, that's one thing. But then when it emits like god-awful shrieks and screams, it makes it like that much worse, right? So I think finding the balance of those things is where the fun comes from designing games like this and giving the player something that they're not ready for or they certainly didn't expect.
Have you ever seen a creature design come through for Evil Within 2 and kind of thought, dude, like where'd you get that idea from?
Oh yeah, like all of them, like
all of them.
Pretty much all of them. There's never anything that team comes up with where you're like, oh, that seems really normal, like a normal, balanced, sane person would come up with that on their own. It's all like every team meeting that we have where they like put up character sketches and designs. You're like, what is wrong with you guys? Like what? Who is coming up with this? Do you guys need a hug? Like, what is going on over there?
Who hurt you?
Yeah, it's unsettling. But, when you play it, when you see it in the game, you're like, yeah, that's pretty scary. It works for our survival horror game. That's pretty horrific.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to bounce off of that, the trailer kind of has a mix of there's like sort of something that looks a little grotesque. A lot of it is very like ethereal and unsettling in different ways. Would you say that there's more of that second kind of like not uncanny valley, but just something that's just slightly off versus the more grotesque?
I would say there's a healthy amount. I don't know. if I've played enough, because it's sort of changing as you're going through. But there's a healthy mix of both. I don't know whether it's 40, 40, 20 or whatever. But yeah, there's definitely the like that's just horrifying. And then they just like I'm like nothing jumped out at me, but I'm really put off and unsettled right now. Like walking down a hallway in Stefano's mansion where he's just got all these pictures of like eyeballs or like a ballerina's foot, and it just has this like horrible slash through the ankle, and you're like, it's not like you can see all the stuff inside, but it's just like it's really creepy, and like why would anybody put a picture up like that? It's that kind of stuff, that sort of again to the point of you can really desensitize a player very quickly, especially in a game like this that, this is not a short 6, 7, 8 hour game. This is a pretty long experience. And if you go right for and stay with bloody, gross horror, like by hour 5, you're just kind of done, right? Like what else am I going to show you that's worse? Like it's all been disgusting. So hour 6 is like, whatever, like more disgusting stuff.
You're pretty used to the disgusting.
So you need to mix in enough of that stuff that isn't actually horrific, but it's just like, there's when you look at it, and you guys know it, like you see it, and you're just like that's just wrong, and it's not gross, and it's not awful, and it doesn't make me sick, but like that's just not okay. There's enough stuff that's just not okay that really helps sort of move the player along in those moments where it's not intense combat or jump scares or whatever, you're running for your life, that continues to keep that edge of tension all along, that you never really feel sort of safe or calm, even when nothing's happening.
Well, we are very familiar with that because we're staying in one of the most haunted hotels in Los Angeles.
Yes,
So a lot of us.
We like serial killers as well. Which is
I mean, she and I are fine, but a lot of us.
Everyone else is quite.
We like that spooky stuff, but that unsettling hallways that don't feel like they were designed quite right. Stuff like that.
Yeah, when you see it, you know it. And it definitely has that feeling in here that. And it's part of what makes gaming fun. I mean, in this particular case, like you're watching a movie and it's a horror movie. You're screaming at the screen, like, don't go in that room. Like, what are you doing? Run away. Like, well, in The Evil Within, like, there's a lot of times where you can decide, nope, not walking down that hallway. Seems like a terrible idea. I'm going to go this way, or I'm going to approach this a different way and try and improve my chances of not dying badly here.
Right. Hedge your bets and think,
exactly.
I can either go down this creepy hallway or hope nothing's going to kill me this way.
Exactly.
Well, Pete, thank you so much for joining us. Remind us again when The Evil Within 2 is coming out.
Coming out Friday the 13th of October, so not too far away. Almost exactly 5 months, right?
Wow.
4 months away. Yeah.
Wow.
We're right there. Ooh, that was kind of spooky.
Ooh.
It'll be out October 13th, Friday the 13th for Xbox One and PS4 and PC.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us. For all the latest, all the biggest games here from E3 2017, make sure you keep your eyes peeled to GameSpot.com.